Hi, good evening, everyone. I am Michael Foley, and I'm part of the lecture series for NPTEL. And I'm going to talk to you about product design and how I got into product design. And at a time when I think the design discipline had really not reached any critical mass in India. So I've got a little bit of a presentation here, and I'm going to slowly walk you through that. And towards the end of it, try and answer questions that come up. So this is a bit of a journey that I took in design, and it spans across 1988 when I joined NID and then started a career which at that point was a little bit of an unpredictable one. But I'm going to walk you through a little bit of it. I think an important part of one's journey is the interest that you have personally, and it's something that I believe really drives what you have as a career later on in your life. And what I did was, I was quite interested in illustrations, painting, watercolors, and I actually ended up spending a lot of time on just understanding nature and a whole range of things around science. So I was quite confused at the end of it because I was interested in nature. I did like science, and I actually had quite a keen interest in illustration and drawing. And I ended up doing some work on modeling as well. I used to build models in school, and I enjoyed that as well. And at that point, I think thinking of a career, the only options to me were architecture, and I didn't really know whether architecture was really up what I wanted to do, and I wasn't aware of design at that point. This is just a little bit of a glimpse of some of the things I used to do, and I think it's important to kind of identify the fact that your early alignments and interests actually drive most of what your career shapes up to be. And I think that's something that all of you should in some way try and identify. It kind of brought me to a point where I by chance got to know about NID, and this is through my father, and he kind of said, why don't you just apply, and maybe something there that could show up. So I kind of looked at NID as my starting point of a journey, and I was still not sure whether graphic design or product design was something that I wanted to do. I was really confused at that point, and I think um, I took it step by step and said, let's just have a look at what the education pans out for me, and then take my decisions at the right time. So I actually then started trying to figure out and identify what I really liked, and one of the things that I really liked was typography and type design, and I think it was something that I have always been keen on looking at as part of something that I will do in the future. And I also, at the end of 5 years at NID, realized that watch design was something that I was very keen on, and I found that there was something interesting as a connect between watch design and typography. And I found the more I studied watches and brands that existed around then, just redrawing them, looking at measuring them up, figuring out proportions that they had, and I found that there was a lot of interesting connections between type design and watch design. And I think by the end of 5 years of my study, I definitely was keen on getting into something to do with watch design. Just a little precursor to that, I mean, in my second year, I actually wanted to specialize in graphic design, and I joined graphic design. And in a couple of months, I realized that product design was something that I was really interested in. No particular logic to it, but I just found a greater affinity to industrial design and product design, and kind of moved by my journey into a discipline that finally has, of course, shaped what I do today. So just going back into the past, and then you drew it. So the big challenge, I mean, if reflecting from the past and today, is that the idea of making decisions before you actually plan a design was something that was a constraint at that point. And I think over time, I kind of slowly transitioned to a mix of both. And I used to model a lot of these ideas out using my modeling skills. We used to use dental wax and then use dental tools and then carve out forms that we would present, and that's non-existent today. Today it's about rapid prototyping that happens, in no time. So just a quick glimpse. What I what I saw as a career. I think for me, I was just taking every year that came by and then kind of refining what I was doing, what I thought of design, and it really gave me a perspective that it's about transition, it's about change. You've got to embrace things as they come. Watch design itself was something new to me, and I feel that I just learned as projects were given on to me. So the first one that I actually did was about proportions, typography, and then connecting them to watches. And this is a glimpse of one of the illustrations of what I did at that point. But if you reflect back and look at how that compares to what we do today, it's about 3D modeling, and you get this amazing reality in terms of what you visualize. It gives you the advantage of moving things around, changing colors, a whole range of things that one wouldn't have thought possible at that point, or if it was, you'd actually have to paint one more image and one more illustration, which really came down to this is definitely a tool for the future for design, at least. So my first project, actually before watches, I did a project with Titan, and I think at that point, if you were a designer, you could design literally anything. That was the broad perception. You're creative. So I was given a task, which was my first year of working at Titan, and that was to create the typography for the jewelry brand that exists today called Tanishq. And we did it. I used to paint these out as large letters, use a photocopier. In those days, photocopiers was the method to scale something up and down and look at it. So we'd illustrate these, put the letters together, put it about 30-40 feet away, and adjust proportions. So it was a tedious process, and I think design has really evolved from a perspective of tools. And I think this point of time in my life really taught me what tools really do and what kind of enhancements they can do for your thinking itself. And of course, given that we'd done the first typography exercise, I moved back into watches and kind of started slowly looking at my whole career and what I would do with watch design. One of the biggest learnings was understanding consumers. Design is not like art, it's more putting your feet in somebody else's shoes, understanding what they, their perspective, and then thinking or simulating what they would expect of design. So it was about understanding consumers completely, figuring out what they need, colors, textures, finishes, size, what would they be comfortable wearing, and then design, of course, a whole range of products. And what I think Titan gave me is a huge experience on consumer understanding. That was the starting of the journey. And I think I moved on to, given our framework of setup, the studio was connected to the manufacturing setup, the R&D, and of course, we had a very good relationship between departments. So what I actually did is just took advantage of that and just studied processes, stamping of metal, understanding how leather straps were made, dial construction. It really gave me an insight into look at processes before you actually design. And I think that's one thing that I've really carried through even till today. And the other aspect of design here was about retail intervention. I think what it does is it kind of gives you the fact that a watch has to be sold to another consumer, and how do you do that? What are the insights that you can place in terms of building that? And that really led to this whole idea of storytelling. And I think storytelling was a big part of what you would buy in a watch. And I think a lot of what you design in the watch was about how you would tell a story and how would that fit to a consumer's interest and mindset. And here's just a illustration of one of the lines that I'd done long back, which is called Xylus today, and it was about the idea of taking something of a very large scale, taking architecture for example, and then miniaturizing it on your wrist, and that was the story there. And the reason I'd done that was to look at watchmaking itself as a craft, and it is about building things with the little elements that you put together to create an expression, much like architecture as well. And I started looking at this whole idea of a small real estate on your wrist, and how do you start expressing things with that just that 2 square inch of real estate on your wrist. And that really opened up a lot of insights to me in terms of attention to detail, and how do you expand that into a larger collection, because consumers are all different. So you can't design one watch that fits all. You have to be able to take the same essence, the story, the whole thought behind it, and expand it to a much wider audience. And it gave a very interesting opening to how a watch would be looked at from one single story, but completely different in terms of perspectives and facets. The other big learning that I had when I was at Titan was this whole idea of working in multi-disciplinary teams, cross-functional teams. And today it's all about collaborative practices, but it was earlier about pulling out one person from each department, one person from engineering, one person from, say, tool design, one from design, that was me, and then a couple of us put together and said, here's a project, let's see how we can take this, because this was one project that really was did not stem from market requirement, but really stemmed from Titan's own need to prove that their prowess in watchmaking is very high. And it actually had created the edge as a collection. And for me as a designer, it was about creating expressions that consumers would experience and wear. The idea that we started off with here was that when you wear this watch, it's so light you don't realize it's on your wrist. And what does that mean from a design standpoint? It's about not seeing any edges. It's about creating almost like a wedge-like form, very very simple, very minimal, almost blade-like in terms of elements. And I think it kind of opened up to a lot of interesting innovation, because we had to push the boundaries on traditional watchmaking, and every single element really got some amount of rethinking, and from a process perspective, and how they could come together. Just an example, typically on a watch, the glass that is placed above the dial is about 0.8 millimeters to a millimeter thick. But when we did this for edge, we had to put it down to 0.3 and then figure out stability, adhesive, mounting, damage. And that happened for every little element that you see on the watch. And it really gave a very, very interesting perspective to what Titan had done. This whole exercise was about 4 years and was completed with a fairly successful launch. Towards the end of my career in Titan, I actually was looking at what next for me. What is it that I should push, even my own company, and what do we do there? And I had actually suggested looking at this whole idea of how technology can play a role, and there were a couple of us who really felt that was a strong idea that could possibly be something that Titan could get into. This was very long back. This was 2004, 2005, and we actually did a pilot of one of the first smartwatches at that point of time, and possibly a little ahead of time. But it really gave us and gave me an insight as to what the power of design is. So when I was starting to look ahead, I started applying for competitions, looked at designing what I could, because that was the only opportunity for me while working on watch design and accessories. So I looked at bicycle design. I did apply in a couple of competitions, won a few, and it kind of got me very excited about the whole wider perspective of design and what it could do. And I think design for me then really started playing such a strong fundamental role in my thinking itself. And with my experience at Titan, I realized that it was not just about me. It was about teams. It's about how you can get the best out of a collective process, a collaborative process, and that's something that I've lived with all through. It's not something that I do completely on my own. I have a method that allows everyone to be in some way inclusive of the whole thinking process. So I started looking at what is my identity in design. How do I make people realize that I'm a little different? and started building a line of products, many products, which was largely focused around home. And with a lot of processes, so I started exploring right across the board, which is heat forming of acrylics, bent ply. So I would go to a manufacturer like someone who makes office chairs, and then ask them to help me with steam bending large plywoods for a form that I would want, and go to a spinning manufacturer and say that this is something that I'd like. And we slowly started over time. I actually kind of got a lot of interested vendors, partners, people who have the processes and insights to help build a lot of these products. The one on the lower one is actually an FM radio that's for the desk. So it was a very interesting, simple insight where you twist the antenna to change channels and you just angle the speaker. So this was again a time before Bluetooth speakers as well. And expanded further, looked at processes. So I started retailing. The big challenge I found was that where was my heart? My heart was in design. It wasn't about spending time figuring out stock and retail. But I realized that everything, it has to all come together as one, and that is something that I really liked about this whole idea of design and reaching design to consumers. So I went around exploring a lot of materials. I think it gave me a wide foundation for processes, beaten silver, to understanding what kind of projects could be done for social impact. We did stoves, and then I started trying to say that I've done product. Let me just expand to a little more to understand the entire larger experience of design. And I then got on to spaces. We did work for Cafe Coffee Day, and it did close to about 1,000 cafes on the identity. And I enjoyed it, but it was something that I feel was it kind of gave my thinking itself an edge, because I was looking at going beyond industrial design. And when you do that, you kind of look at everything from a design perspective and not from the domains. And I have a close affinity to public design as well from that perspective, and that carries on today. So 2006 is when I went on to start Foleydesigns, and the way I structured Foleydesigns is pretty much like I had structured myself within the studio, and when I was running the studio at Titan. It was about collaborative practices, about everybody having a role to play, and it's not about just dissemination top down. So that's a culture we're trying to still build even today. So what do we do in consulting? I think the challenges when you take a career in design is, today design in India is not very fragmented in terms of domains. There are some domains that are well known, there's some that are not known. I think industrial design was one of the domains that took some time to be fully understood, and it comes with its own challenges. Industrial design is a space that you have to be able to collaborate. Otherwise, you just can't take an idea of your sketchbook into something that is manufacturable. So we were looking at what model to use for industrial design, because the kind of categories were very diverse, and it taught me a lot in the first few years. I think the big parts were not about creativity, it was about client dynamics. How do you understand the client? How do you understand the brief? You have to again put your feedback in their shoes and say that understand their brand far better, so you can deliver to them at a certain standard. How do you present ideas? How do you sell ideas? The whole idea of how do you cost your effort? I mean, design fees. So there were a lot of challenges that we were starting to kind of look at and in some way embrace. And of course, market dynamics were evolving. India is slowly evolving. It's reaching a cusp when industrial design will really reach some kind of a critical mass. And I think it's something that really gave us a well-rounded perspective of design. So it kind of moved me to creating an ecosystem. And industrial design is an interesting field. You have to be able to create models. You should be able to sketch an idea. You should be able to engineer it out. You should be able to create a proof of concept. And in effect, you're actually looking at multiple disciplines that come together to deliver just one simple project. And if you look at it, if you break it down, it's simple things. It's from modeling up things that a designer could carve out of foam, to sampling it out, to just visualization. Today visualization techniques are far more evolved. Then of course the big part is proof of concepts. Proof of concepts are the last mile where a client actually understands what understands the idea completely in terms of what you're trying to sell. And of course a big part is engineering. I think without engineering, industrial design really can't go beyond a certain stage. And that whole process is actually far more complicated now. It's we have rapid prototyping, we have augmented reality, you've got a whole range of ways of machining and sampling things, and it kind of is evolved to such a level that you can ideate, create a prototype, and showcase it in much shorter time, and create the level of iterations prior to investing a lot in terms of tooling, which was possibly not the case when, say, we did Edge, which was many years back. And it's kind of transformed today. You can actually continuously iterate till you get it completely fine as well. So structuring the studio, I mean, this is something that I had taken this call that I didn't want to do an independent practitioner's role as a career, and I wanted a studio where we could at some point look at a culture that disseminates to everybody, and that's the future goal of being able to build a studio. And a studio is just not possible unless you have partners. You can't have everything under the same roof. You have to be able to build enough alliances and associations with and relationships that kind of build the right seamless process for any design journey. So if you look at a studio, it's about structuring creative teams that's open as to how designers or individuals structure their teams, but this is how we've done it. We've kind of looked at a more holistic approach. We wanted creative teams to be supported with vendor liaising, because you have to be able to communicate with manufacturers externally, vendors externally, and be able to dialogue to get the right solutions. New business development is very important. You have to be able to continuously look out for new ideas, new initiatives, and how do you kind of reach out to new people for projects. And that's a continuous mechanism that has to constantly move. I think a big part of any studio is technical design. Technical design is really something that, like I said, translates ideas to reality, and I think it's an important part. And here's where engineers play a very strong role. Getting engineers to understand design and getting designers to understand engineering is a big part of setting up a studio. And the moment you have that dialogue and bridge, you can do quite a lot of amazing things. And of course, prototyping is something that is a given today. I mean, you have to be able to take things to a physical level. Partners, again, we create partners that almost complement the team that we have in the studio. R&D is in different types. You have software and hardware. You have multiple types of R&D. It could be material processes. So depending on the partners you have, you could be able to create interesting associations on innovation. A whole supply chain that you require to get any idea out. Manufacturing is a big part of any product design. And of course, like I said, both sides require prototyping. One is for proof of concepts for an idea, and the second is to kind of prove that they actually work for manufacturing. And we've been trying to construct some kind of a continuous model for innovation. I think any studio would want continuous innovation requirements, and the way we had looked at it is, I mean, it's about creating looking at insights. Insights are there all around us, and how do you translate those to opportunities for design? And those are opportunity platforms that create enough opportunity for a range of products. And from there you kind of look at what defining design innovation. And here design innovation is not a standalone aspect. It's what you do with a company, with a brand, with an organization that you work with, and then continuously look at developing products, some for the near future, and once in a while you probably look at getting hopefully a path-breaking product. So the studio's setup, the way I'd set it up is very multidisciplinary, and it was about expanding services from product design to a larger experience design. And we looked at a whole range of categories of product design and expanding it out to aspects of branding, packaging, and of course spaces as well. So we did this largely to kind of get projects at the point. Reality is that India is still not at a stage, or possibly reaching it now, where complete specialization or 100% specialization in a category would even survive on its own. So we kind of looked at a broad-based approach initially, and we are hoping that we could specialize as and when the market also changes. So looking at opportunities that as a design studio, you have to be able to look at opportunities, because nobody else gives that project, and you have to look for it yourself. And this is an interesting example that of one such opportunity that we kind of got into. I think it's important to respect opportunity, however small it is. So this particular example actually is about a calendar design. We were asked to design a calendar, and we were told, why don't you look at what can herbs do with science. And we came up with this whole idea of X-ray imagery, illustrated, colored, so it kind of has a certain amount of beauty to it. X-rays otherwise look a little more drab and dull. And we brought this lively set of illustrations that came alive for a calendar. And this was for Himalaya, where we designed this set of 12 images, and it was an organic process that had actually evolved into a design brief for their whole product personal care category. And this is something that really shifted from just a calendar idea to an entire line of personal care products. And I think that's when we kind of started deep diving on product design for the brand. How does the container itself work? How do we embed this whole X-ray idea into it? And it kind of became a very interesting holistic exercise, and it over years is expanded to a whole range of products that we support the brand with today. So I think it's important to respect opportunities, however small. Very often you kind of look at opportunities and come and say, maybe it's too small to even look at, and realize that it's important to kind of take that risk and just go ahead and do something that you would possibly get a lot out of in terms of just learning. The other part of a studio is the whole idea of partnering. As a design studio, you've got to be able to create the right partnerships to build products which are long lasting, and it is not something that you can do overnight. It's something that requires a lot of effort and a lot of repetitive development. And this is just one example of that. We were working on Blue Armor, which is a product that basically attaches itself onto a helmet and cools the inside of the helmet. And I think it was a simple insight. And India, there's a lot of traffic jams. You are waiting in the sun. You have your face sweating, and it was a simple thought that kind of brought the product in and come relevant opportunities. And for example, in this case, the insight was that most consumers or users at home of surround sounds are not audiophiles. They are people who understand and appreciate music, but might not be able to deconstruct what and how that sound is delivered. And this device, this speaker, actually was designed for a user like that, which is basically somebody who loves music. And the way this was designed, again with a startup, we kind of worked with them to bring alive a new expression. We looked at aluminium turning, because speakers were typically wood, fabric clad, and we kind of redefined that, saying let's just go with spun aluminium and completely look at almost like a bulb like format. The reason also was that it could draw power from any of the bulb sockets anywhere, and wirelessly would create the right level of surround sound irrespective of where those were placed. So it was an interesting insight that created such an interesting opportunity. As a studio, again, I think the other aspect that you really need to look at from design is the whole idea of being able to create unique experiences. Products, there are so many products today in the market that you have to be able to make user experiences memorable. And I think that's the big challenge that all designers have. And how do you make people, how do you make an idea sticky in the mind? How do you make them remember that this is something that I will recall after I've used the product? And here's an example of one that we've done for Jaguar, where we had actually looked at the whole experience of just dispensing water. It is a mundane experience, but how do I recreate that so it's doesn't add effort, but it creates an interesting, memorable one for you. So you swing out this whole arm and it releases water. The more you swing it, it kind of gets from cool to warm, and that itself created a very interesting expression and a very memorable user experience. So that's how it works. It kind of aligns itself flat. So from a semiotics perspective, when it's aligned, it's off. When it's swung out, it's open. So it kind of gives you visual codes that help you, also enhance the fact that there is a certain change in functionality. It kind of went on for us. Our journey actually went on to building solutions, and we started looking at a team in-house where we were looking at a lab that could help with material innovation, process innovation, and product design. And we started looking at developing a whole range of ideas that would cut across different segments, and then at the hope that we would be able to take these to market and find some way of going directly to consumers. So we kind of, with this experience, we built a lot of interesting products, and we looked at products as avenues for us to open up wider streams of products within that. This one, for example, is a chandelier that we designed that has no wires. The wires are the ornamentation in this chandelier, so it's no internal wires as such. So in some way, we were creating an expression that I could create a whole range out of. And this kind of used this whole idea of bespoke, handcrafted, and combining it with a certain amount of machinery, so it kind of had the right amount of precision and rethinking in terms of configuration as well. And that led us to the whole idea of building brands. Can we actually take brands to consumers? This is a very challenging one. I think we believe that it's every designer's dream is to take products to consumers directly, and we realize that finally design is a small part of the whole chain that you require to actually go to a consumer. And there are challenges of logistics, there are challenges of stock that's not sold, there's cost of stock that's available and stuck with you, and there's product development for pipelines. So it's a fairly large challenge, and I think it's something that we're still embracing, and we'd like to continue with it because we'd like to understand these challenges better. So we built two brands here. We built Tilt, which is about home experience and a lot of home products. Again, rethinking simple insights at home, and then started recrafting them to a lot more expressionate ideas. And of course, Sculpt, where we looked at things on the go. We started with jewelry, and we're looking at expanding to a whole range of other products that are portable accessories. So I come down to this point where I think it's an important part to really talk about is technical design. I think, like I said, I think my whole experience with engineers has been really good over the years that I've worked, and I found that if there is the same wavelength of thinking, you can actually do a lot with technical design, and it really eases out what a designer can also think. So you create dialogues that help a designer improve their solutions, and also help engineers improve their way of solving the engineering challenges that are posed. So it's about it is a very critical asset for us in terms of teams, and we believe that it in a sense it's about design engineering. And I think over time engineers become a lot like designers, and we've had some of our engineers who've actually transformed into designers as well. So it's actually a very good almost coexisting capability that a studio requires. So like I said, I think engineering, technical design is a wide area. I think there's the whole area of processes, materials, it's about hardware, electronics, and you need a very wide range of expertise here. And I think it's a space that we are embracing further, where we want to widen the whole technical prowess that we have, and we'd like to be able to create far more complex products, and that is something that you can't do just by pure industrial design. It has to be a collection of mindsets of different expertise. Um, it brings me to this interesting project that we had done, which is the Commonwealth Games Baton. And it was one of these projects where it had an amalgamation of things. It had to be a symbol of the Commonwealth Games. This was the 2010 Games, and it was to be created in India. It had the Queen's message on it. Basically, the baton carries the Queen's message, and the idea was to look at how we could craft this completely as a studio. And we realized that the uh, the baton itself is something that we won't be able to create ourselves. We had to be able to go back to our collaborative processes to really align ourselves to get this going. And we found that that was the best practice that we could kind of apply to this, because it was for the government and we had to be able to deliver with no compromise at all. We were given 9 months and from scratch, and we actually took this, embraced the idea without having a solution at that point, and built it up. So just to give you a sense, we actually looked at a collaborative team. It actually expanded beyond these, but the key members were our studio that really created the concept and vision. We took this whole idea of soil, picked up from every state in India, and then said we'll apply it onto a baton, and then that becomes almost symbolic of India itself. So when it goes from one country to another, it actually carries the some part of India, to every country. And we then added a little twist to it. We said we'll do a little bit of a technology idea in this that kind of is very immersive and subtle. It actually had illumination that's built in, which I'll explain a little later. Like I said, I think the important part of the baton is it's not like the Olympic torch where you have a flame. It is about the Queen's message that comes from London to the host nation. And here the idea here was we wanted to inscribe this on almost like on a leaf, and this went back to the historical ways of how things were written and documented on patras. And we said let's look at miniaturization, because miniaturization is a big part of technology today, and it kind of clubbed this whole old and new idea in a very powerful manner. But we had no solution on how we were doing it, so we kind of over time built that up. Here we kind of found a security hologram manufacturer to create this inscription on gold. So the Indian Army actually helped us with the soil. We found that as a studio, it would have been virtually impossible to go to every state, pick up soil, come back in the amount of time that we had, and develop the baton. So we actually did partner with the Army, and the Army was very keen because it was a project of prestige, and we got the Army to help us in from Leh to Andamans, and we got a bag of soil from every place with proof that a person had picked it from somewhere near a milestone that could define which state it came from or which place it came from. That was a very powerful part of the concept. I think the whole idea was the journey of making this baton itself was collaborative, and the concept itself. We had BEL that created the technology for us. We created this GPS coding on the baton that linked up the flag colors of every nation to the baton. So when the baton moved from India to South Africa, for example, or to Pakistan, it would actually create this whole difference in the flag colors abstracted just to create the symbolic change. We had a camera, we had the athletes who were able to near live relay images, relay voice bites onto the website, and we managed that entire thing from a development perspective. And of course, lastly, we had Titan, who I look back on for support for manufacturing, because they have an exquisite manufacturing facility, and we got their help to kind of craft the aluminium, CNC mill, aircraft grade aluminium, cast a very fine gold leaf for the messaging, and of course kind of give it to us in a very pristine finished plated manner. So it really got us thinking about is this how we should do everything. And it's about a culture that we want to build and that breeds design. And how do you do it? These practices work only if you have a clear vision, you have a collective ownership, and collaborations don't work if you don't have independent roles. And you should be able to have the ability to overlap expertise. So if you, it's about an engineer talking to a designer and a designer talking to a material expert and being able to understand and dialogue, and that overlap actually creates this very interesting collaborative dynamic. And finally and lastly, of course, it's the whole drive to deliver. That's the most key part of any collaborative process. Run through some parts of iterative process. I think, like I said, I think design, don't expect design to be a one time come up with an idea and it comes right down to completion. And I don't think that's the case. Every design process is iterative. It's, you can either take it as many mistakes that create a refinement, or many iterations that build on the previous failures. And this is how we've kind of looked at projects, and we push our partners to also appreciate the fact that it is iterative, and don't expect the first one to be the most successful one. And that's how we kind of built up. This is an example of Blue Hammer, like I'd shown. This is the first device, which was very large, bulky, but it kind of had proven the idea to a consumer. And then over time, it kind of moved on to how do you miniaturize it, how do you add value, how do you get consumer feedback that builds on the product. So you start creating a mechanism then that allows for a good continuous iterative innovation that helps build and improve products. So going back to insights, I think it's an important part of our lives here. We have to look at insights and continuously look at how we can rethink them for new innovations, be it a very simple form of soap, or looking at any other product that you see there. So if you look at the idea of business, because as a studio, I mean, for us, it's about business as well. And there are many facets to what kind of projects you can get. So looking at one insight, I mean, the whole idea of arm's reach innovation. How do you make a consumer buy a new product and not be alienated by it, is by marginal incremental innovation that you slowly buy into and accept. And this is a good example of it, where we did a small marginal innovation. We did an asymmetric key for the Godrej Naftal and gave a small experience innovation. We also enhanced the whole tactile feel of the lock, increased the feel of durability, and it kind of created the go with you. And this is an example of Pureit, where we've kind of partnered with them for several years, helping them evolve their products. And you would see that there's a certain amount of synergy in the way it's come through. With this is the first brand that brought in black in a device that was mostly white and blue, and still was defined as a very premium product. So it is a lot to do with a customer's experience of design that you see. And this is one of the last ones we've done, where the idea was it was copper infused and done in a very scientific manner. So we had to bring in not an old perspective of copper, but something that is new age. So we had to look at a lot of material processes to really create this idea. We actually looked at transparent injection molding with back painting and of metallic tone that really gave us this luminosity of copper, but wasn't copper at all. So in some way we kind of created the visual tones that were required to create this idea of precision, and it came alive with a lot of attention to material and process. So like I said, I think that's an important part. The other experience that we actually created with process innovation was this idea of blue water. Water purifiers are, again, things that you have very little interaction with, and we wanted to create a small innovation. So we actually created an interesting refractive lens in the water dispensing space that actually gave a column of blue light, and that itself kind of drove the whole idea of purification as a thought and an analogy. So design also can play a role in last mile experiences. If you look at the Java bike, we worked on smaller elements within the bike, where it's about the last mile consumer experience. It's the fuel cap, it's the tachymeter, it's the seat design, it's the whole elements that when you're riding a bike, is the experience that you want to feel. And the idea is to kind of bring alive the thought of a classic, and we started building these interventions from that perspective. A lot of brands are being created here, and we have to be able to differentiate brands. And I think designing for brands is a critical thing, because each brand survives on its traction with consumers. And whether it's a smart product, or it's in the space of inverters and batteries, or on the other extreme, which is just creating very powerful sculptural expressions that draw to the whole sinuous aspect of water itself, and to recurring products that are sold in general retail. Look at how we can expand on creating a design ethos, a design language that really speaks to consumers and then holds on to the consumer as and when you create more products. We've used this for a lot of innovation across categories, and it's kind of helped us partner with companies and get them to work with us from a long-term perspective in terms of relationships. And it go down to as simple as a bar of chocolate and how you shape that, because that's everything in some way has design embedded, and it's important to kind of be sensitive to the fact that even a chocolate shape can have industrial design as part of it. Moving on to something which is not industrial design, but design again plays a role when you have to kind of carry brand essence in livery. When you have to be able to carry a visual code from, say, packaging to a product, or to a person. Livery plays a very important role, and this is the RCB team and how we kind of partnered with them to create a long-lasting livery design. So moving on close to towards the end, I think it's important to design with a context. It's just to give you a feel. We had actually developed flat-packed paper furniture a couple of months back, and we realized with this crisis on today, we'd have to rethink what we do with what we've already designed, and we kind of quickly rehashed a range of ideas and processes and experiences that we've already had as a studio, and crafted them for this current COVID crisis. And we created cardboard beds, we created masks, we created a whole range of interesting ideas that we've opened up to manufacturers to partner with us and build them up as something that they can actually take to market as well. And we believe that open source innovation is something that is a large part of our futures today as design studios, as design individuals, and I think it's an important part to give back to the society in some way as well. So, and I think we've now realized that it's an area that needs a lot of attention in terms of design. So one of the thoughts that I wanted to leave back is, as a studio and as any individual in the design space, you have to be able to be in the space of preemptive thinking. It's about thinking of something before it actually happens, and if you do that, you're able to resolve and provide solutions at the right time, and are not reactive to what is happening. So this is something that we feel is an important part for anyone who's in the design space and wants to actually contribute. It's important to start predicting, preempting, thinking of problems before they actually happen, and then quickly try and derive interesting ways of solving them. Whether it's disaster relief or food packaging, there's a lot of areas that you could predict, preempt, and that's what design does as a tool. It helps you estimate, it helps you visualize ahead in the future, and it's the tool that we should then start using to actually deliver for solutions for today. And the journey ahead, of course, for me is, it's about, very simplistically put, it's about sustainable and balanced design. I think balance is needed in our lives. There's a lot of consumption and less thought of what happens to waste and material itself, and the extent of material that is used. And I think that's an important part to, just have as a beacon of where we want to go. And I think this is something that I'd like to definitely be a part of. Thank you so much. I'm going to quickly look at some questions and see if I can answer some of them. So I'm just going to look at a couple of questions and see if there's some of them that I can go through. Um, Here's a question from Nikita Sonar. How is production engineering? Sorry, just give me a minute. I have to open this up a little more. Production engineering students, how would they enter the field? So I think, like I said, I think for design there are a lot of uh, opportunities for postgraduates. In fact, most of the design colleges in India have postgraduate programs where you could be an engineer of varying backgrounds, mechanical, electromechanical, production, and enter the field for a shorter course, which is about 2.5 years. And the advantage you would have is that you've actually got a certain amount of a rooted perspective to production. And I think that's a big part of design in any case, and I think that's something that will really help you if you're looking at that as a part of you know a career. There's another question on how do you start product design. This is from Pranay. Product design typically starts with a certain amount of understanding of the category. You've got to understand the brief that you have or the challenge that is given to you. Like I said earlier, you have to be able to understand who you're designing it for, and you should be able to live and feel and think like that person or that group. And the moment you do that, you'll have an anchor, and I think that's a good part to kind of build from. The second part, of course, is to understand the larger framework, legacy in that category. Are there things that have been done? How have they been done? What has failed? What has succeeded? And I think that's an important part to kind of look at before you actually start ideating. Hari has asked about how do you apply for a patent for a product. I think we've been doing that a lot in the past, and it's an important question. Some products take a while to reach the market, and the patents are largely for you to protect what you've done and how, so that nobody else is concurrently doing the same thing and kind of eats into what you would project to do as a business. Patent things that have an opportunity and are scalable. I can give you an example. At Titan, when we did watch design, we had to do design registration, but we did not do too many because we realized that the market is moving constantly and trends change, and therefore we felt design registration, do them for things that had longevity, and that is an important thing to kind of look at when you're patenting. Another question from Deshbandhu is how can we start a journey for the future? Well, I think it's important to be able to predict a few things and understand that nothing is predictable too far ahead in the future. You've got to be able to create models for yourself that allow you to keep making those incremental moves ahead in the right direction. I think it differs from person to person. Some people have a great vision and interest of what they want to do in the future, but I think a lot are still exploring and trying to figure out what works best for them. So for them, it actually works to be able to do, take these incremental steps and find a way of validating that first incremental step and take a little bit of risk. So you've got to have a good balance of risk and safety in the way you take your calls. Another question Deepika has asked is, at which age were you inspired to be a designer? Frankly, I joined NID, and that's when I realized design was the space for me. The advantage students have today is they can actually reflect from everything that's been done in the past. The world has moved so far ahead that you can take better calls today. And I know I was interested in a creative space, a creative field, but till I was, I think, 16, 17, I didn't really realize that design was the field that I wanted to be in. How's the thought process while designing? Um, there are ways to structure your process, and each designer does it differently. Uh, each one needs to construct it for their own comfort. Don't go by a formula. I think there's some designers who are very organized. Some that are like to take these leaps and build on things organically. And I think you need to identify what you are best at, and then kind of structure the process. But it's important to have a process, because design has to have an end goal. It's not something that is an endless exercise. So you should be able to look at how we can take a process, construct it for yourself, and over time refine it for your own projects as such. I'll just take a couple more questions. How is product design helpful in AI? I think AI in some way is a category that we are all embracing at this point. It's something that is making us learn faster. I think it's helping us from validation, from visualization, from user perspective. What kind of insights do you use for experience design? And AI in some way is giving us a sense of some support in terms of understanding past experiences and past data that can help improve a particular practice and a process. So I think it's still a very new space for product design, and it's I think experience innovation will help with artificial intelligence. I think it's important to kind of embrace that in the discipline and get its place here. Just one last one. Any mobile apps helpful to motivate product innovations, patenting? I think it's important to kind of look at. There are apps that help as tools for product design, for visualization. There are not too many for patenting, but you have enough searches now for validating patent searches much better. There are a series of patent lawyers that can help you. I think enough groundwork on searches for innovation and patenting is the best way to kind of start. Google is a great Google Patents is a great way to start. What do you think the scope of product design is post COVID-19? Okay, this is a very fundamental question, and we are all embraced with this massive crisis. Design studios are being rethought of, given the fact that a lot of them have been in spaces that are not required immediately, and some studios are actually reinventing themselves to think of how we can relook at their capabilities. But I think a big part of COVID-19 is it has kind of made us a lot more collaborative as a team, and a lot more open, and that's where this whole open source contribution has come in. I think it's going to make the design fraternity a lot more active. It's a great there is a great upside to it, is the fact that design has a large role to play in problem solving, and we just need to find the right partnerships, right associations. Don't do it completely yourself. Try and find the right teams that can take an idea to reality, and it's definitely going to transform product design for years to come. We've got to be sensitive to so many things. I mean, we've gone down to hands-free, don't touch, remind yourself about how to be safe. It's kind of opened up communication design, product design, service innovation, environment design, and I think all of us need to embrace that and look at that as a key part of our roles as design studios. So thank you so much. There were a lot of questions. I'll see if I can find a way of looking at those and responding at some point. But thank you very much.